So good afternoon and welcome everybody to this Common Ground COVID-19 Reflections meeting between the PSRBs, the HEIs and QQI. I'm Annie Dooner and I'm going to be chairing this session this afternoon, and I'm an independent consultant, but until April this year I was president of the Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Dún Laoghaire. So I have a little bit of experience, I hope, in the HEI sector. I'm delighted to be chairing this meeting because I think this meeting is an important part of the process that QQI has undergone in partnership with the PSRBs, the HEIs and other stakeholders in order to come together to look at how in this post-COVID time we deal with issues of qualifications, professional qualifications, assessment, how we deal with examinations and how we ensure, in a spirit of cooperation and collaboration, that the best academic and professional practice standards are maintained. I think our aim is to provide the best experience possible for learners whilst maintaining absolute professional standards and best practice. And it's very helpful today that we have some reflections on some international best practice as well. So COVID-19 has provided us with a lot of challenges in the sector and in the professional bodies, but it also provides us with an opportunity now, I believe, to look not only at the current and near future solutions for issues that we're having to deal with, but also maybe to reflect on some of the current practices and to look at some solutions and some possible ideas, shared ideas into the future in the interests of students. This meeting is about facilitating dialogue. It's about cooperation. It's about listening to each other's perspective and the sharing of ideas. And I think it's a great opportunity for the HEIs and the PSRBs to understand where the other side, I don't want to use the other side in an adversarial session, adversarial way, but where the other party is coming from. And I think it's very important that we both understand each other. QQI's role in this is, I suppose, a kind of honest broker. You know, there's been a number of meetings between different bodies looking at the accreditation principles, looking at how we work together into the future. And I think QQI's role has been to facilitate dialogue between all parties and to help to have the discussion around the principles, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, and to make sure that everybody is able to hear each other's voice. The proposed accreditation principles that have been circulated and that I know some of you have contributed your ideas on are really the platforms for this to happen. So if I may, I'd share very briefly with you some of the key messages that have come out already from the consultation to date on the principles. So to date, all the respondents really have been satisfied that the principles capture all the relevant engagements between the PSRBs and the HEIs. Some respondents did say that communication between the HEI management and the PSRBs needs to be considered, in addition to that which maybe currently happens between the PSRBs and the programme contacts. So I think from the HEI's perspective, I think their view was that there needs to be better dialogue, not only with the programme teams, which works very well, but maybe with the management, the registrars, the heads of faculty, etc. The potential for reducing duplication of effort between the academic bodies and the professional accreditation was very welcomed by all the respondents. So anything that makes life easier for the PSRBs and the HEIs in the interests of clarity, transparency for students, I think was warmly welcomed. And one PSRB indicated that actually it had made reference to the principles in its own consultation when it was looking at the revision of its standards. So I think there's been some very useful outcomes from the consultation and the feedback so far. So this, as I say, is being done today in a spirit of cooperation, in a spirit of working together to find the best possible solutions. And it's great to see so many participants from the HEIs and the PSRBs here today. We're all getting used to online meetings, but I think I would just, if you don't mind, go over some of the logistics. Just to remind you that this session will be recorded. So also, if you could ensure that your microphones are muted if you're not speaking, it really does help with the quality. And there are some guidelines being put up on the screen now from Mairead that are very helpful. We will use the chat function, which is the little square, the little chat box. I won't be asking people to put up their hands and contribute. If you have a comment or a question, please put it in the chat function. What will then happen is either one of the panel, if you have addressed it to a particular person, will address that issue, or if it's something that we feel is important, then we may do it in the Q&A session towards the end. Okay, so we've just leave those on, and the meeting, as I say, will be recorded and will be circulated to everyone after the event. So I look forward to a great dialogue. I think it's important that we have a robust dialogue, that we share our ideas and that we share our thoughts and our best practice. We have a wonderful, rich array of speakers from the PSRBs and from the HEIs, and I'll introduce them as they come into the meeting today. I would just like to start by thanking them. Their presentations, I think you will find, are really, really interesting and helpful, and we're delighted that they've given us their time this morning. So the first speaker that I would like to introduce is Dr. Barry O'Connor, who is the president of Cork Institute of Technology. So Barry is going to talk about, from his perspective and HEI's perspective, the benefits of the accreditation principles. So Barry, over to you, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Annie. Good afternoon, everybody. I think this is a great coming together of all of us for stakeholders in this accreditation and regulatory process for our higher education programs. Basically, my first slide there, and I've been warned by Annie not to speak for an hour, even though you lecture for 25 years, it's hard to go in under the hour, but I do my best. So basically, I would look at the principles as they're being put out as a dynamic operation there in terms of, you know, the standards are informed by the stakeholders, the standards inform the processes, and so on. It's a dynamic cycle, and I think this dialogue we're starting today, or continuing today, is important from that point of view. Nothing's set in stone in terms of how we're going to operate it. Again, just very briefly, what I'm just going to do is go through a few examples we have had, and I've had some in other cases as well, in terms of interacting with professional bodies. I guess in CIT we would have at least, we have had more than 50 professional accreditation bodies coming in to evaluate and accredit our courses. This is all about collaboration, as Annie said. It's collaboration between the QQI, professional bodies, regulatory bodies, and us as providers. And of course, as Annie made the point, it is about the learners. This is all about making sure that the qualifications are accredited and recognised nationally and worldwide. To me, the outcome from all this should be agreed joint processes, and from that we get shared ownership. We get a harmonised evidence base, and in simple English, one soft data gathering, because we all know we're doing programmatic review or doing accreditation. We're going to go down the mine again and look for the data and present it in a different way. I think with agreed processes, it's one soft data gathering, and I'll give an example of that later on, and that will give us, I think, what we would call controlled and controllable flexibility in dealing with accreditation and QA all at the one time. Now, we're talking about post-COVID, but if you go back to a few years back in terms of our own, first of all, it's a joint award between ourselves and UC as an example, and I guess just to show how the collaboration between the professional bodies and ourselves actually lay down a foundation for resolving problems as they arise. And we have a biomedical science degree, which is delivered jointly and awarded jointly by ourselves and University College Cork. It is also accredited by two professional bodies, the Academy of Clinical Science and Lab Medicine and the Institute of Biomedical Sciences. And just because we were so involved with the professional bodies, we had an issue going back about 6 or 7 years ago. You know yourselves, in terms of CEO, you make so many offers and you have an acceptance ratio. Normally we'd make 40 offers. No, we'd make 80 offers as CEO and we get 40 acceptances. And then 1 year I was above with the CEO and I made 80 offers and I got 78 acceptances. Problem. How are we going to find placement in hospitals for 78 or 80 students when we normally have only 40? So what we did was we actually took, in consultation with the two professional bodies, ourselves and UCC, we actually developed a diploma in clinical practice, which is added on at the back end of the degree, so the students graduate with their degree, and then to get accreditation, they'll do the full year of rotation of clinical practice in the hospital. So whether they could get it straight away upon graduation or down the road, that there was flexibility built into the system there, and it was based on total cooperation and support from the professional bodies. Again, I suppose the other angle in all that, of course, is the joint academic quality assurance processes as between CIT and UCC. We call it programmatic review. UCC, we call theirs quality review because it evaluates a department rather than a program. And of course, coming down the line, like a lot of other colleagues around the table today, if we call this a table, we have CORU coming down the line as well in terms of a regulatory body, which will be imposed, shall we say, on this joint award. Another example, just very quickly, again, coming back to where we are in terms of COVID, is in our National Maritime College. Our regulatory body there is the MSO and the Department of Transport. And from that point of view, it's an academic program where graduates also have to have certificates of professional competency awarded by the MSO. And again, in the past 12 months now, past 6 months, our students have not been able to go to sea. So they can't get the sea time, they can't get their certain elements of their certificates of competency. So again, in conjunction with the MSO, we're looking at sequencing the sea time when it comes back online to allow the students to graduate with their full degree and their full certificates of competency, which is an integral part of the degree. So again, tying in with the regulatory body at an early stage and all along the way, that dynamic relationship allows us to overcome problems as they arise. So very briefly then, maybe I'll just talk a little bit about my own experiences with I see Damien is online there with the French Commission of Engineering Titles, where I've done a few validations over the year. And it's an interesting operation in terms of go back to it, just leave there a second, go back to it. It's the body which up until 2013 had the sole accreditation and quality assurance role in terms of engineering diplomas, engineering degrees across France and in fact overseas as well. And it is an organization run completely by the members, by the profession and by the academics, engineers. It's basically the review and validate engineering schools, again, like here on a 5-yearly basis. Interestingly enough, if it's a public school, if it's a state school, the CTI will review and recommend, validate a program for the following 5 years. If it's a private school, I see Dennis Ryan online there, if it's a private school, the law says that we will go in, evaluate the program and make a recommendation to the minister. And the minister then decides whether or not to validate the actual awards. It's, again, it's no, and then say 2013, then just to move on very quickly there, in 2013, they came up with the law of 2013, as they call it, where the French government established an overall body for the validation of research and teaching in higher education within France. Now, I remember being present at a meeting in 2015 when the CTI, as good engineers, they ignored the department, and a member came down, the Secretary General who came from the Department of Higher Education, and lambasted us engineers, and particularly French engineers, that they weren't taking this HCRS seriously. And by 2016, 2017, again, going back, what has happened now is joint evaluations. And it's a new structure, but it's actually only happening for the last couple of years, I guess, really. And it's a bit like our issues now with doing programmatic review and doing validation accreditation. Typically, there'll be 4 or 5 of us on the CTI commission, on a CTI panel. There'll be 8, 9 or 10 possibly on the HCRS panel. And as we know, 14, 15 people going into accredited degree is a bit awkward, to say the least. And they have a separate template. But it's been worked on in terms of trying to harmonise the data collection is the same, but the matrix and so on of the outcomes are still miles apart, really. So there is a difficulty, and I think this is where, and I know Karina and her colleagues would have worked with the people in Bristol, the PARN, in terms of trying to harmonise academic quality assurance and professional accreditation. But I think it needs to be done. And it goes back to where we are in terms of the whole business of collaboration between the bodies and the HEIs and the agency. The CTI, for all that, they have a very, high standard. What they had done over the years is every year, each engineering school in France must publish, fill out a template in terms of the number of students, the breakdown, male, female, the number of lecturers, the budget, and so on. And that's available year on year to the public, but it's also available a bit now like our AIQR for from QQI. It's available as well when you're going to do a panel, or even a member of the public looking to enroll in a college. All that information is available. But again, it speaks to the value of having the professional body totally tied in with the quality assurance side of it, totally tied in with the learners and the higher education institute as well. And but on the panel, you'll always have a student representative as well. That gives you an indication what they're doing there. Maybe just to finish up, maybe from my point of view, again, I go back to the ESG 2015, the European Standards and Guidelines, and a particular challenge we've had in terms of COVID. I know it's coming up on the agenda, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. In terms of placement, we've had some difficulties, as many colleagues would have had, in terms of placing our students within the whole COVID ambit. And again, its placement is extremely important from our point of view. It's important from the ESG 2015, and you go all the way back up to INQA and to EQUAR and so on. And it'll be interesting to see what people have come up with from our point of view in CIT, where all our programs and therefore all our students must do a placement. And we were certainly faced with big problems there last March and April when we were trying to place our students. First of all, there's the risk and the safety of the students, the risk assessment of their actual placement. There's the whole matter of insurance when they go on to placement, the transport to and from where they might be getting placed. And we came up with some good innovative solutions, but always in conjunction with the professional bodies. And that is extremely important. The connection with professional bodies for us is vital. Another example of that, for example, being with the accountancy bodies, in terms of the insistence. We would do a lot of continuous assessment, as most people would do now, but for the accountancy bodies, for exemptions, as you know, you would have to get a number of, they will base their exemptions on final exam results, a sit-down final exam. And again, because of our strong connection with the accountancy bodies, we were able to come up with various types of open book exams, either short or long, again, to solve the problem. So my basic tenet here is this strong connection between QQI, the HEI, professional bodies, on an ongoing basis, and these principles will do that on an ongoing basis, allows you to solve problems in terms of sequencing, in terms of coming up with workable solutions that are workable for the HEI, workable for the students, workable for the professional body, and most of all, in the current context, acceptable and approved by QQI. So I think it's well worth pushing on with these principles and getting the input. And go back to my original diagram. This is a dynamic cycle. The information should be sharing around, and we can adapt as we go along, as we have indeed adapted under COVID-19. So I leave it there, Annie. I hope I stay within the timeline. Thanks.
Yeah, you were absolutely perfect. Thank you very much, Barry. Yeah, I think Barry's raised a number of issues that we do want to see some chat on and some discussion on. Obviously, assessments and how assessments and final assessments are carried out, how the integrity of those is ensured. But Barry also touched on the very important issue of placements. And, in my head, I was thinking particularly about things like the health service. But interestingly, Barry raised the maritime. The students getting out onto boats and into the sea. So I think we have assessment, we have final exams, we have all sorts of things to consider, including placements. We have a very good range of PSRBs with us. Thank you all for attending, and HEIs. And I would just remind you to use the chat box, please, if you do want to ask a question. But thank you very much, Barry. That was a very helpful and very useful introduction to the session. Mairead Boland from QQI would just like to come in for a couple of minutes now, just to remind you about the accreditation principles. Thank you, Mairead.
Yeah, so just to encourage everybody, we have had a good response to the consultation to date. I've included a link to the accreditation principles you'll have seen in the chat sidebar, as well as a link to the form where you can give your feedback on those principles. We'll be finishing up the consultation at the end of December, at which point we'll be inviting all of you to approach us to subscribe and endorse those principles. We'll do that by simply adding a confirmatory statement at the end of the principles and including a list of all subscribing institutions and organisations at the end of the principles. So we really do look forward to that, and just again to encourage you to, if you haven't already done so, to give your feedback through the consultation form. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mairead. I have my microphone on. Apologies if you heard a lot of barking in the background there. The postman arrived, and I think COVID has made me really understand why my dogs get so excited when the post arrives. It's a highlight of the day for many of us now, I think. So apologies if you heard the woofing in the background there. It happens all the time. Okay, so let's move on now to some reflections on the higher education institutions in Ireland's response to this crisis. And I'm going to start off by asking Karina Maguire to give us the QQI agency perspective. And Karina really only wants to take a couple of minutes for this. So you're very welcome, Karina.
Thanks, Annie, and thank you to everyone for coming along today and listening to us. As Annie said, please keep the conversations going. You will be familiar with this report on the impact of the modifications to teaching, learning and assessment. Indeed, professional bodies were part of this. I'm not actually going to go through the detailed findings of this report at all. The professional bodies have had a copy. The HEIs, I think, are worn out by it a little bit. But just to say at the outset that the lead researcher on this, Dr. Peter Cullen, will be happy to provide a separate session on this particular report for the professional bodies to go into the detailed findings and help navigate those. I really just wanted to raise a few key points from the perspective of the agency today. I suppose points that we consider to be important in the context of establishing more collaboration and in supporting the principles that we're trying to sell today for future collaborative work. This particular report reflects a very brief reflective project, and it was at a particular point in time. The findings are all there and they're there for everyone to see. But nonetheless, I suppose is quite a revealing deep dive into the inner workings of the complexity of the higher education institutions. And of course, size is not always indicative of complexity, as we all know. In many ways for QQI, it provided quite a unique close look at the decision-making infrastructure, the sheer volume of different elements and inputs that make up the higher education community seen in a different way. I suppose for each institution, not just for the system as a whole, but for each institution, particularly when the institutions had to actually deal with all those, the multiplicity of all those elements at one particular point in time. And that was to pivot around to coping with that particular crisis. That's pretty mind-boggling. I suppose the point there is we're all inclined to forget about the complexity of higher education institutions, the complexity of our system, what makes this complexity, you know, what the different elements, inputs and outputs are. As we continue to deal with these institutions, we are all busy pushing our own agenda. And of course, QQI is quite guilty of this as well. So those principles are trying to ensure that I suppose we all understand each other a little better, that the HEIs understand the professional body perspective, the professional bodies understand the operating context for the HEIs, and that's actually a really important high-level objective of what we're after. The findings in the report also clearly indicate the internal quality assurance bridges and connections that we have been talking to professional bodies about, that they were in place for everyone to see. And this is what we in QQI spent a lot of time supporting, enhancing, and also reviewing the effectiveness of. So this was a really important finding for us and for the national system and for the confidence of the system. Those particular quality assurance bridges and connections also facilitated quite a lot of agility and flexibility, enabled the institutions to provide considered, timely reaction to anything that they had to do with regard to the teaching and learning environment and the many complications associated with that. So that really ended up in good, sound decision making, and also is a good basis for ongoing monitoring. Not that everything went perfectly well, that's not the case and nobody's saying that, but certainly the standards and integrity of the programs, there was lots of evidence there that these were a key focus at all times. So I suppose the other finding for us was the system level collaboration here, I think, and I know Barry started collaboration. The theme of this meeting today really is around collaboration. That has actually been really revealing. The layers of collaboration, not just system level, not just the connection of agencies, the department, the whole lot, the connection between the institutions. There was just under 70 organisations involved in providing some sort of support, or typically closer to 60 with direct input to this particular report. So this project did involve everyone involved in education and training in Ireland, which was actually quite interesting given the short time. The support and confidence in the system, I think, was backed by that particular initiative. The professional bodies themselves were also included with the responses from the survey that Murray did, which was most helpful. The report itself, however, has been cited many times in America, Europe, Australia, plenty of other international destinations. And I suppose, given the point in time and given the fact that it was quite a short reflective study, it was very comprehensive in its accountability. And I suppose the higher education institutions in particular provided a huge amount of detail to support that particular comprehensiveness. So we are still presenting findings around the world to different agencies where we have quite a lot of interest in it, including our colleagues in the UK. And I suppose, again, it's showing that our system is well connected, and there's a lot of interest in finding out how we actually did fare out with regard to the international counterparts that we have. Now, chapter 3 of the report, again, is interesting because it does provide a bit of an international benchmark. And again, the advantage for Ireland is that kind of collaboration among the national system, the institutions, and amongst the discipline areas. So we definitely have an advantage here in Ireland around collaboration. And also we have an advantage with regard to our agility and flexibility in that regard, and that's something that we really want to promote through these principles. So there is a serious amount of confidence in our system as a result of this report. It's not just the positive outcomes, but obviously there's lots more work to do. Challenges and issues have been identified, and we know this is one area with professional bodies and HEIs that need to come together to work more closely on that, and we are delighted as QQI to be able to try and facilitate and broker any of those engagements. In terms of just concluding, I suppose the report is a particularly good insight for professional bodies in particular and other stakeholders, and I suppose again it's a good insight to that complexity, a good foundation to kind of build upon the accreditation principles where we are trying to share more, understand each other more. As I've mentioned already, there is an offer for professional bodies from our lead researcher, Peter Cullen. He's happy to take the professional bodies through the findings in more detail. If that would be considered helpful, that's certainly something we'd be delighted to do. As I say, understanding those different contexts are really key to enhancing collaboration, communication and engagement. And I suppose this is really, really needed because the future, as we all know, it is unknown. Most of us have not seen our colleagues for 8 months. It's hard to know what the long-term impact of this will be, and that's what we need to start planning for. So thank you very much. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Karina. That's very helpful, and it's good to hear that there are positive outcomes from that report, and also good to hear the international reach that Irish best practice is having. That's always good to hear. Thank you as well to Peter Cullen, who's been putting up the links to that report as we've gone through. Richard Manton has just put something in the chat box of interest to people, saying the Engineers Ireland Academic Society has held webinars on the impact of COVID and remote labs, recording here, and remote assessment, recording available shortly. So thanks very much to Richard for putting that up. One or two of you are trying to use the hands up function. I'm going to be mean and say I'm not going to take hands up. Please do what Richard has done and put any messages or any comments in the chat box. There's too many of you really to be monitoring and doing the hands up. So apologies for that, but thank you to Richard for kicking off with a useful piece of information there. Okay, so I'd like to turn to Trinity College now. And this is going to be a presentation from Dr. Jürgen Barkhoff, who is the Vice-Provost and Chief Academic Officer for Trinity College, and you're very welcome. Jürgen, and Jürgen, I hope, will take us to about 1:15, looking at the institutional perspective and the lessons learned from Trinity College. So over to you, Jürgen. Professor Jürgen Barkhoff. Over to you, Jürgen.
I had to unmute, sorry. Thank you very much, Annie. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to a meeting that has such a wide representation from professional statutory regulatory bodies as well of HEIs. I was very pleased to get the invitation from Karina, and what I will be presenting will reflect the experiences in my own university, but I think I was invited because I'm currently chair of the IUA Registrars Group, and in that capacity also chair the joint meetings of the Registrars Group and the IUA Quality Officers Group. So input from my colleagues, quality officers, particularly Roshan Smith from Trinity, but also from the other universities and from the registrars is also present in this presentation. Having said that, Trinity is of many comprehensive Irish HEIs because half of our schools are actually engaged with one or more of the PSRBs. And I will, in the first part of the presentation, speak about the period March to June as a period of shared concerns, and we'll look at some of the lessons learned during that period. And then in the second part, we'll look at the months ahead, the current academic year, as a period of shared opportunity. And some of the issues that have come up already in the previous presentations will resurface. Obviously, like all HEIs, our first and immediate experience when we moved into the pandemic was one of crisis response, concern for the safety of staff and students, but also putting our teaching and our examining online and assisting staff in this emergency response. And key to this was clear and frequent communication with students and staff, but also with government, our partners, and including placement providers and accreditation bodies. It was very helpful that the Quality, Integrity and Reputation Working Group so quickly came together to look at common experiences and lessons learned. And I want to congratulate the group to this very insightful report that Karina just reminded us of. It is tremendously interesting and helpful, and it's very, very gratifying to hear that it has such international echo. I don't find it surprising. If we speak about the collaboration within Ireland between HEIs and QRSBs as PSRBs as key to the success. The same is also true for international cooperation, and our accreditation principles learned a lot from Australia, and that's good, and it's great that sort of now people can learn from our experiences. Having said that, one of the lessons learned, one of the challenges of this immediate period was one that Annie already mentioned in her introduction, that was also ours, while the engagement with the schools and programs and the PSRBs was often very intense. A better link in of the university leadership and our own quality offices and the registrars. That is something that we should work on together to align communication and messages as best as possible. If I look at some of the challenges around the attainment of program learning outcomes that we had to deal with, that we still are dealing with, I just want to mention, first of all, the fact that, of course, in the initial approval and accreditation of programs, we didn't envisage that the pedagogy needed to be aligned to blended online and hybrid modes of delivery. That is an ongoing project, once that we take very serious. We have now sort of put this into our risk register, that we need to make sure that the learning outcomes continue to be aligned in this new blended form of delivery. A big thing for us was and continues to be the uncertainty whether the PSRB would or will prospectively or retrospectively accept our alternate assessment strategies, which were approved by the HEIs. Ongoing communication is the key to that, trust and flexibility as well. An issue was the disruption to professional placement for students, concerns about meeting clinical hours requirements, the need to delay final clinical exams to ensure that required clinical competencies were successfully achieved. That was, for example, an issue in dentistry. And we have ongoing concerns for placements in the current academic year. Some have already been deferred from semester 1 to semester 2 in the hope that semester 2 would look better in terms of the ability to deliver the placements. There is a question mark over that in the last few days. Of course, the messages about the current level of restrictions working have been encouraging, but there's great uncertainty and with an impact on the progression for current cohort of students, for example, in social work and teaching, but also in the health professions. And we need to work together to manage that. Another issue that we are facing is that there are difficulties in sourcing placements for certain disciplines where under COVID conditions, partner institutions can't accept the same number of students for placements or can't accept any at all. And that's an issue that we will need to work through. So the lessons learned out of this is, on the one hand, the importance of early and clear communication with schools and programs, so between the PSRBs and the HEIs, to allay these uncertainties on changes to assessment might bring. Another lesson learned is how important the role of mediating authorities have been and continue to be in the future, like the HSE, in facilitating resumption of professional placements. So the publication of the HSE infection prevention and control requirements was extremely helpful of us. The acceptance of alternate methods of achieving some clinical placements experiences through remote assessment, experiences like remote care via e-health and telehealth, that has been very helpful, and as has been classifying students on placements as essential workers. In the preparation for this, we also engaged with the students. Now we are in the lucky position that our SU education officer did nursing. So she has a lot of hands-on experience and also is in very intensive contact with students. And you will not be surprised to hear some of the issues from the student perspective, where clinics were closed, students were diverted to COVID-19 testing and thus not able to avail of learning opportunities. The use of remote assessment, of remote care, while it has been welcomed and is very helpful, not all students have an appropriate environment at home or in their residences to conduct the confidential interactions needed for this. There have also been issues where students were needed at the coalface to help manage the COVID situation, that they were asked to work more independently than for their training would have been desirable, and that the student learning experience thus was compromised, and the assessment of competencies by tutors was hindered in some cases. And also the question of access to COVID-19 testing. I'm sure that's an issue that will resonate with many of us. Overall, I think it is important that in all this crisis management, which has been very successful and is a credit to everybody, that our focus needs to be on the students' status as learners rather than as healthcare providers. Now let's move in closing to looking ahead as a period, the current academic year as a period of shared opportunity First, as an opportunity for sharing good practice on areas of common interest, and that has already been said, and I want to echo this. We have a shared interest in ensuring the integrity of assessment and maintenance of academic standards, and the work of the National Academic Integrity Network is very important here. You're all familiar with its work plan, and this is under COVID conditions. Obviously, it was established pre-COVID, but under COVID conditions, its work is particularly relevant, as online real-time exams and experience with proctoring software have thrown up new challenges that we are working through. We are learning lessons, and we are working through these issues together. Also around remote assessment of students on placements. The second opportunity is has also already been mentioned by Annie in her introduction. We should use this opportunity to streamline quality and accreditation review processes, avoiding duplication while upholding standards is in all our interests. It is clear we all agree on that, and there are a couple of suggestions on this slide. In the interest of time, I won't read them all out, but the overall aim of this suggestion is that while embracing the accreditation principles that we are currently consulting on, and that we will all sign up to very soon, to sort of harmonize, streamline our processes to avoid duplication and achieve a greater degree of harmonization and coherence. Now, my final slide is really I know that I'm speaking to I'm preaching to the converted here, that really the current dialogue, the current common the way we together confront the current challenges is really an opportunity to work towards adapting, implementing, and operationalize the accreditation principles. And I will just sort of in closing just say that I would reinforce the key messages that previous speakers have already articulated. This is about partnership. This is about intensive dialogue in an atmosphere and in an attitude of trust and flexibility. And that will allow us then to execute our shared responsibilities using the protocols that the accreditation principles articulate. So I leave it at that, and thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you, Jürgen. That was really helpful, really lots of good food for thought in there. You know, what Jürgen said is when COVID struck back in England, in Ireland, certainly in March, we all had to be nimble and responsive to what was happening at the time. But as Jürgen points out, we may well be in some kind of COVID situation for the next year or possibly even the next 2 years. So it's very important that we are responding now, that we are looking as HEIs, as Jürgen said, at how we incorporate this into our risk and our ongoing monitoring. But, you know, in the spirit of cooperation between the two bodies, the PSRBs and the HEIs, we need to be thinking about not just this year, but possibly the year after as well. And I'm not being pessimistic, I hope, but it is just a recognition that this is something that we may have to live with. So those ongoing issues of professionalism, assessment and placement may require slightly longer term solutions. Jürgen, I was delighted to see that you had a big focus towards the end there on the learner, because, you know, we are dealing from the HEIs and the PSRBs with how we manage this issue, and we must never forget, you know, that there's a poor student maybe somewhere with pure not very good broadband, with not very good home environment, struggling to say, how am I going to get my placement? Where will I get my clinical hours? How will I manage it? So, you know, we have to always remind ourselves that, you know, there's a learner, possibly a very stressed out learner, at the centre of all of this. And I think you're all very cognizant of that. Sue Hackett has put a piece up in the chat. talking about a national symposium on work-based assessment on November the 19th that has been run by the National Forum for Teaching and Learning and QQI. So there's a bit of information up on there if anybody would like to follow up on that. Okay, so thank you very much indeed, Jürgen. So we've heard from Barry and from Jürgen from the HEI's perspective, but what's really important for us this morning is to hear two different perspectives from the PSRB. So the first one is going to be Siobhán Healy, who is Head of Initial Teacher Education at the Teaching Council, and then Shirley Gibbins, who's the Qualifications Manager, Veterinary Nursing at the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons UK. And you can imagine, you know, from both the teaching and the vet science perspective, you can imagine the issues that both of those professional bodies are having to deal with and adapt to. So I'm going to hand over to Siobhán first. So thank you very much, Siobhán.
Many thanks, Annie, and it's great to be here today just to share a little bit of the story of how the council has adapted, as you say, in the middle of COVID and the impact that it's had. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit in terms of how we've dealt with and adapted in light of COVID. So, I mean, I don't think anyone will ever forget the 12th of March and the impact that it's had. And I mean, certainly it's had a massive impact on the education sector as well as all the other sectors. So in terms of the council, I mean, we were definitely impacted across both our operational side of the house and also on the policy side of the house. So in terms of operations, it's certainly given us the opportunities and challenges, but certainly forced us to change the way that we do business and look at how we operate. And also, I suppose today is talk around the impact it's had on the policy side of the house. So certainly we've had to look at decisions in that space. And also issuing national clarifications and guidance in terms of ensuring that policy in my remit, it's ensured that policy in terms of initial teacher education and induction can continue to operate in our new COVID-19 environment. So today I've specifically been asked to share with you the story around how we've dealt with the area of school placement, and both in terms of the immediate and also in terms of planning for the next academic year, which I will do. And before I do that, I suppose I'm just going to give you just a quick look, I suppose, at the fundamental principles that we decided on at an early stage of COVID, in terms of the principles that would guide all of our decisions in the council, and also the approach. And then hopefully you'll see as I talk through the area of school placement how we've used these principles and the approach. So look, in terms of our fundamental principles, I mean, just as Annie said there, I mean, the focus is on the learner. And we were very conscious of taking a very humane and just and fair approach in all of this, and to ensure that no teacher and the wider student teacher would be disadvantaged by the impact of the measures taken in light of COVID. But also at the forefront of our mind, we're obviously a regulatory body, and that is to protect the standards of initial teacher education. So these are the fundamental principles, and getting that balance right when we were making our decisions throughout COVID. In terms of our approach, and again, there'll be nothing new here. I mean, they're the key words at the minute in terms of adapting to the pandemic. But I suppose I'll just try and show and reinforce how they've actually been so effective in terms of decision making. So again, it's around being adaptable, flexible, proactive. You know, being out there in the fore in terms of contingency planning in this world of uncertainty that we're in at the moment. Prompt, clear decisions and clear communications has been absolutely vital, again, in terms of the uncertainty that we're in. And I mean, obviously in the education world, there's a lot of different stakeholders in operation. So again, prompt, clear decisions has been vital. And look, I mean, as you've already seen from other speakers, vital is that ongoing engagement and consultation with all stakeholders to ensure that the decisions that we are getting are decisions that we are making are correct, to ensure that we're listening to issues on the ground and issues that are coming in from all points of view. So that has proved to be vital as well. So just, sorry, now I just want to. Oh yeah, it's grand. Yeah. So I mean, In terms of school placement, I'll just talk you through some of the decisions that have been made in this particular area. So again, the immediate impact, as the previous presenter spoke about, it was into crisis management mode, and to look at what is the immediate impact of these COVID measures on initial teacher education, and specifically around the area of school placement. So, I mean, the immediate impact was looking at there was final year student teachers due to graduate in the June. Some of these student teachers were out in the middle of school placement at the time, and obviously with the COVID measures that were implemented, they were unable to complete their school placement requirement in full, as in the duration of weeks. And also they were in the situation, some were preparing to go on Gaeltacht placements in the April, so they were unable to fulfil those requirements in full. So again, it came back to looking at our fundamental principles, which were to ensure that no student teacher was disadvantaged by the measures, but also protecting the standards. So the decision, and it was a prompt, quick decision that we made, taking all factors into account, and we issued clarifications very early on in March to state that no teacher would be adversely affected when applying for registration due to their inability to complete all requirements. And we were very clear that teachers who HEIs awarded the qualification to, so where teachers were awarded their qualification, they would not be disadvantaged due to their inability to complete school placement or Gaeltacht placement requirements in full, and they could continue to be processed for registration with no conditions applied. So I suppose that was looking at making sure that those teachers could continue to graduate for the fairness of those teachers, and also for the system, as we needed obviously to ensure a supply of teachers. I'm just trying to go on to my next slide here. And obviously, in terms of the protection of the standards piece, I mean, HEIs were very innovative and effective in terms of how they continued to assess that school placement element, even where the school placement did abruptly end for some students. So standards were protected there at all times. So I suppose then we quickly moved into we needed to plan for the next academic year. I mean, there's a lot. Sure where we were going to go in terms of schools reopening or not, but we knew that we need to have contingency planning in place to ensure that student teachers could still complete their teacher education programme as they have planned. So there's just a quote there from our guidelines. I just think it's very apt in terms of the world we're in today, to say that, you know, initial teacher education programmes are there to ensure that tomorrow's teachers are competent to meet the challenges they will face and are prepared to be lifelong learners and continually adapt to ensure they're enabled to support their pupils. And my God, have our teachers had to adapt to prepare to teach in the new environment, and they face that challenge, and they're proving that they certainly can do that. So the same is the same. I mean, in this situation, we need to make sure that our student teachers are prepared to teach in their classrooms of today and tomorrow, and that needs to continue. So very early on, I mean, we knew we need to be proactive for the 2020-21 academic year. First and foremost was school placement must continue for a number of reasons. The system still needed a continued supply of qualified teachers. You had to make sure they continued to graduate. We have to safeguard, obviously, the continuance of the quality learning experience for that student teacher, and for that school placement is obviously integral to the ITE programme. It's where the rubber hits the road. It's where the theory translates into practice. So that still needed to happen. And as previous presenter referenced as well, I mean, in terms of postponing placements, it's just some more postponed from the other years, but that was not, I mean, it's postponing anymore would just add pressures to the education system that would become untenable. In terms of planning, we issued very clear and early communications to HEIs to advise that planning for school placement should continue in collaboration with schools in line with current Teaching Council policy. However, we did issue a statement to say that we did recognise and acknowledge that there definitely would be a need to consider the adaptability and flexibility in relation to school placement arrangements and the practical implementation of policy on the ground in light of the COVID measures, and also in terms of the government guidance that we were waiting on in terms of schools reopening. So in terms of this, then there was lots of consultation and engagements. Obviously, the department were working on guidance for the reopening of schools, so we'd really close communications with the department through all of that to ensure that school placement would still be up there first and foremost as well, in terms of that guidance and in terms of reinforcing the importance that schools will continue to provide and support student teachers in gaining places on school placement. So that was key. We also liaised with HEIs and all stakeholders in terms of developing guidance on school placement. And what we developed was a guidance note which provides a framework for the planning of school placement in all scenarios for schools, whether they fully reopened or whether teaching or learning continued in a remote environment. And that once we had developed this guidance in consultation with all stakeholders, we issued it in August to facilitate HEI's planning. And it was also issued from the Department of School to education partners as part of the guidance for reopening of schools. And I suppose first and foremost in that guidance, the Council recognised the variety of sites of teaching and learning and practice that were emerging due to the new environment. We recognise those sites of practice and also recognise a variety of modes of assessment by which school placement could be assessed. And this, of course, is to ensure that school placement continues and obviously that it's adaptable to the new environment. Also, guidance that was developed throughout that time was a protocol for registered teachers on school placement. So obviously became very apparent in June, July, that government, their objective was to fully reopen schools. And as part of that, they did ask us to support them in terms of ensuring that there was an increase in supply of teachers to fulfill substitution and supervision requirements that would arise as a result of fully reopening of those schools. So on this, we liaised closely again with HEIs to look at mechanisms by which we could facilitate the availability of teachers who were on school placement to be available to schools as an additional resource for such substitution and supervision vacancies that could arise, but all the time, first and foremost as well, was to protect the student teacher in all of this, recognise there was still a learner, recognise the integrity of the programme that they were still working through, and also their well-being. So the protocol sets out a very balanced way in which registered teachers on school placement can aid to fulfil in the middle of this crisis that additional need there may be for substitution cover, but also protects them in terms of their continuing teaching and learning. And HEIs were very flexible in terms of, and again this is a temporary protocol in place for this year, but HEIs again were very open to working with us in terms of looking for mechanisms in which this could be available through flexible delivery of their programmes. So just, I suppose, beyond COVID-19, I mean, obviously we've got good contingency plan in place, but it's just recognition that in light of the evolving context, ongoing engagement with stakeholders is absolutely vital. I mean, we are continuing to still meet and engage with stakeholders. The guidance is there, but there are a couple of issues still cropping up. We met with them most recently last week to look at the issues that are arising around the assessment of observations in schools, specifically around GDPR issues, etc. And we will continue to liaise with the department and with any other stakeholders that we need to in order to facilitate those conversations and work through how we can continue the smooth operation of school placement and ensure our continued supply of our qualified teachers to the system. So thanks, Annie. I hope I haven't gone over time on you.
You've been absolutely perfect. Actually, Siobhán, everyone's been perfect and it's been very scary, Chair. Everyone's keeping to time. Good. Thank you very much. I mean, I really like there, Siobhán, those right back at the beginning of your slide, the two key principles that no learner should be disadvantaged and that standards would be protected. I mean, I think those are absolutely at the core of what we're talking about today. And our 2020 graduates from the HEIs have to be absolutely sure that they have reached, not only the correct academic and assessment standards, but also fulfilled the requirements for the professional bodies. And I think that's very important to give them them the confidence that they have not been unduly disadvantaged as a result of this. Now, clearly, there have been issues, there have been problems, but that protection of learners and ensuring professional standards that you referred to there, Siobhán, I think is, is an excellent way of putting it. And of course, we all recognise, I think, the contribution of teachers during the COVID crisis. So thank you for that. Okay, so a slightly different perspective from the veterinary world, but again, probably some similar issues and probably some specific issues facing people who are aspiring veterinary surgeons. So I'm delighted to welcome Shirley Gibbins from the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons in the UK. So over to you, Shirley, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Annie. Thanks for that introduction. So as Annie mentioned at the beginning of the talk today, my role within the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons is Qualifications Manager for the Veterinary Nursing Department. So I am specifically responsible for ensuring that the veterinary nursing degree programmes are fit for purpose, and therefore the students at the end of their qualification are eligible to join our register of veterinary nurses. So we as a regulator are responsible for the veterinary profession as a whole. That's veterinary nursing and veterinary surgeons, and that's across the UK. We therefore determine all of the regulations that students must comply with and achieve in order to join our registers. So specifically for the purposes of today, and because of my job, I'll be talking about veterinary nursing, but there is significantly the same sorts of changes have been made on the veterinary side. And if you do want any kind of further information or guidance, do have a look on our website. We've got a whole raft of FAQs available to people. So in relation to the VN registration rules, they're set by our council, and they are mandatory requirements that students must achieve. Specifically relating to the qualification in general, which is accredited by the RCVS. I'm going to come back onto some specific issues that COVID then threw up in relation to the qualifications. A specific set of skills. So I think it was Barry mentioned earlier that students have got to achieve particular competencies. We have the same thing in terms of our qualification. So we refer to them as day one skills and day one competencies. Students must have evidenced achievement of both of those aspects in order to register, and they must achieve a specific number of hours in practice, which is 1,800 hours in practice throughout their programme of study. However, because of all things COVID, it quickly became apparent that some of those aspects were just not going to be possible for the students. The qualification as a whole, as we've discussed already, the HEIs were very, very good at adapting very quickly and moving into a hybrid or blended or purely online approach. However, one of our specific qualification requirements for registration is that the final practical summative assessment of students is an objective structured clinical examination. Now, that was not going to be possible during COVID, particularly when we were in the full-scale lockdown between kind of March and July. Some of our programmes, you're talking of 50 to 100 students. Oh, I think
we have a slight glitch on the screen there, QQI.
We've just
lost Shirley's presentation.
Yeah, I'll just reshare it 1 sec.
We're all getting used to these things happening, I think.
Yeah, I can carry on talking. So
there you go. We're back with you, Shirley.
Lovely, thank you. So as I was saying, it quickly became apparent that the students wouldn't be able to sit the OSCEs when you're talking of 50 to 100 students who are normally assessed within a small time frame. Wasn't going to be possible. Additionally, and I know that, again, this issue has come up a number of times already, placements were closed, and therefore the day one skills and competencies in the workplace weren't being achieved, and the students couldn't meet their hours requirement. The original plan was that we would defer. So defer the practical assessments, defer the hours completion, defer the day one skills completion. We had a slightly different approach to theoretical assessments in that most of the HEIs moved to an online proctoring system, or they amended their previously accredited provision from purely kind of closed book if that was required, because for the day one skills and competency there must be an unseen element of assessment, but they couldn't do that necessarily. So some of them did an open book assessment. Then when the students were able to return to campus, at that point they did a synoptic closed book assessment to basically tidy up everything they needed to cover at that point. However, in relation to the aspects that we had considered we could just defer, and that was very much based on the government guidance, the Ofqual guidance, QAA guidance, it, you know, as things progressed, and this went on for, I think, longer than people really were expecting to start with, we realised that there were going to be a significant number of students that could not complete their qualifications. From an HE perspective, we were talking about 1,000 students, and we also do run, we do accredit FE programs as well, so another 1,000 students. The knock-on effect for us is that those people therefore are not joining the register, and whilst the practices are closed, that might not seem to be a problem, but eventually we're going to have a lag. So we needed to get them through to the point that they could join the register. And we needed to, from the students' perspective, the impact on their mental health of not being able to complete the qualification they've worked so hard for 2, 3, 4 years, and not being able to get the pay rise, not being able to have that more responsibility, you know, in their employed setting. So we brought in some temporary amendments to the VN registration rules, which were passed, fortunately, straight away through RCVS Council. And we determined that the practical assessments could be deferred, or the delivery, which is always accredited by us, could be altered so that it was delivered in a COVID safe way. And obviously we would review that on a case-by-case basis, and the HEIs were very forthcoming with their proposals. More often than not, their proposal was accepted. If it wasn't, it was then deferred until the COVID situation had kind of changed. We also introduced an amendment to the hours in practice. So where we would always have said it needed to be 1,800 hours, we changed that to, if you don't achieve the 1,800 hours, we will review that on a case-by-case basis on the proviso that you have met the day one skills. So if you've had all of those signed off in practice already, and you've had your final practical summative assessment, we will review your qualification completion, and we will make a decision about whether or not you are eligible to register or not. So we try to be kind of flexible in terms of the specific registration requirements. Now, as I just said, most of the HEIs were able to deliver the practical assessment safely. However, this is not going anywhere. And a number of HEIs contacted us and kind of said, thank God our OSCEs aren't until November or December. Oh, look, it's November and we've gone back into lockdown. So we firstly actually developed an alternative assessment, more so for the FE side, because whereas the HEIs would be assessing 50 to 100 students at any given time, the FE programs actually were assessing 300, 400, 500 students over a weekend. So it was clearly not going to be possible for them, and they also did not have the expertise in the higher up awarding organisations to develop an alternative assessment. We felt an obligation to the students on programme to help them find a way that they could complete their qualifications. So an industry-specific task force was set up with representation from every stakeholder to do with veterinary nurse training. So the RCVS, the veterinary nursing department, were present. We had students, we had clinical coaches, so they're the people that train the students out in the practices. We had representation from the universities, we had assessment specialists, we had representation from the FE side of things, and basically just made sure that this was going to work, and it would give us confidence that the students actually are competent having completed this assessment, because that really is what we're trying to check. And therefore, providing they've met all of the other requirements or the amended requirements, can they go on to join the register? So far, none of the HEIs have needed to use this assessment, but we do anticipate them contacting us soon and asking if they can utilise this amended assessment. And obviously it's available for all of our VN provision, so of course they can, and we will help them develop anything they then need to be able to go and deliver that assessment themselves on their own campuses. As I said previously, the students unable to achieve the hours requirements would have their skill completion audited on a case-by-case basis. We've set up kind of a risk strategy for that, depending on the number of hours they have or have not completed. the quality assurance that's completed in relation to their day one skills, and any other kind of aspects that we think we need to look at, and then we can risk rate it and essentially determine if they're eligible to join the register or not. We haven't yet had to utilise this. We think we're more going to be impacted, or sorry, the on-programme students are going to be impacted more, so those in their second or third years as opposed to those completing their third or fourth years. So we're anticipating this being utilised within the next 6 to 12 months. If we start to see repeated issues or areas of concern, the registrar will then need to make a decision as to additional what's the word I'm looking for? Additional kind of categories that she might want to put on their registration. So, you know, yes, you can join the register, but you need to demonstrate 10 hours of CPD within the next 6 months or whatever that might be. We're not sure what that's going to look like yet, but, you know, we're working towards continuing to adapt that policy. Looking forward, all of our temporary amendments are being reviewed on an 8-weekly basis. So far, our guidance hasn't really changed since March sort of time. We've tweaked some of the wording just to make it a bit more all-encompassing, but in reality, you know, we're happy that we put a really stringent approach in place at that time, and therefore we can make sure that, you know, providing everybody sticking to that, we're happy. We have reviewed and amended our routine auditing plan. So from our perspective of the regulator looking at the HEIs, are you fit for purpose? Are you doing everything you need to? Are you complying with the accreditation standards? We are that's always a risk-based approach, but we have amended that risk strategy and we've focused it more specifically on COVID-19 issues. So we developed a COVID-19 amendment update kind of request form that all of our delivery sites completed for us. When that came back again, we risk rated it. We then set up meetings with those people that we felt were higher risk and kind of gave them a bit of help as to what it is that they also might need to be thinking about, and kind of changes that they're suggesting they're going to think about in their programme. Do we think from our perspective and an accreditation perspective that's going to be sufficient or not? We're resending that on a regular basis. In fact, we've just resent it again this week because we're heading back into a lockdown. We hadn't anticipated sending it quite this soon again, but you know, we're trying to make sure that we're being as flexible and adaptable as we possibly can. Those amendments to the policies and procedures are part one of the form, and part two is the providers really telling us what they perceive to be their challenges, the actions they're taking, and also any proposed challenges they anticipate. So a second lockdown on the first version of the form was absolutely the thing that people were kind of most wary of. In terms of the aim of the RCVS as a regulator through this obviously very challenging time is really kind of focused around these three words of compassion, understanding and flexibility. I will hold my hands up and say, as a regulator, we can be quite slow to move in the grand scheme of things normally. And I hope that during COVID, we've been able to actually act quite swiftly so that we can reassure the HEIs, reassure the students, and really have the best interests of all the stakeholders at heart, ensuring that we're maintaining the integrity of the profession. Ultimately, the students on programme want to join our register of veterinary nurses, and that's great. That's what we want. That's what we need. But we need to make sure that those people are going to be competent veterinary nurses. We can't just say, yes, oh, it's fine, you've done your qualification, but you haven't done X, Y, and Z, don't worry about it. You know, join the register anyway, I'm sure it'll be fine. Because, you know, there's nearly 80 people on this call. You know, if you're taking your pet to the veterinary surgeon, the nurse that's completing the anaesthetic, something goes wrong, the patient dies, that's your cat, that's your dog, that's your guinea pig, whatever it is that we're talking about. If you found out that that nurse had not actually completed their training to the appropriate standard, I think you'd be quite annoyed and upset and all of those things. And that really is the message that we tried to get across to the industry as a whole. But we've kind of taken that mindset of, we know we need the standard. How do we do that? How do we help to enable the students to complete their qualifications and get them onto the register? That has been the approach and the mindset that has seen us through a very difficult year, and making sure really that we're doing the right thing by the profession, by the industry, by the students. And hopefully that's come across with everything that we've been trying to do for our accredited programmes. So that's everything from me. If anybody has any questions, do feel free to ask in the chat box or in the Q&A session shortly. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Shirley. That, again, a really, really helpful and interesting look at how a PSRB is dealing with the current situation. I thought what you gave there, Shirley, were very practical solutions to the issues. You know, it was great to hear, for example, you know, the idea that you just defer assessments, and then that realization, actually we can't keep deferring and deferring and deferring, because as I said a few moments ago, this could be with us for the next year or 2 years. So the fact that your organizations, you know, came together to find practical solutions to assessment, practical solutions to placements, whilst, as you said in the end, that maintaining integrity, both academic integrity but also professional standards integrity, I think that was very, very helpful. Okay, so thank you all to my presenters so far. You all kept to time beautifully, and you gave us some very interesting food for thought. I did just put a reminder in the chat box. If you have any questions, thoughts, sorry, I've just realised I spelled session wrong in that. I can spell, you know, please forgive me. If you have any thoughts, comments, anxieties, frustrations, just anything you might want to say, just while I give you a little bit of information about some of the next steps possible with QQI, if you have any comments, please type them in now as we have a bit of a time for Q&A. Okay, QQI would like to just say to you that Mairead will be following up with the PSRBs to see if any of you would like the session that Peter Cullen suggested, Peter Cullen from QQI, on the report that Karina highlighted earlier. So if you feel that would be helpful for the PSRBs to have a more detailed session on that report, which I think we saw earlier as having some good international reach, then Mairead will be in touch with you about that, and that's a good opportunity. Also, if you would like further detail or information on the work of the Academic Integrity Network, then QQI can facilitate and provide that as well. So a couple of suggestions and opportunities for further dialogue and further discussion from QQI there. Okay, so I'm not, here we go. I have, thank you very much. Podrick Hennigan has put something in the chat box there. Okay, so thanks to QQI and participants. Okay, thank you, Podrick. The Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science sees engagement between providers and the PSRBs as key. Yep, this type of engagement is important to ensure that providers and PSRBs can respond flexibly for students while ensuring that standards are upheld and professional competencies are required. Absolutely, I think that's that very helpful input there has really summed up what this session has been about, which is bringing the two bodies together to ensure that we maintain those standards whilst acting in the best interest of students and giving the students comfort that they are meeting the academic standards and the professional standards. So thank you for that. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they would like to drop into the chat box. I'm not seeing anything. If any of our presenters would like a final comment. No, you're all happy. Yeah, sorry, Shirley, yes.
Yeah, I would just add one short thing actually. I appreciate that I'm from the UK and primarily your Irish institutions, but from a PSRB perspective, we've really been pleasantly surprised at how interactive our communications have been between HEI and PSRB, and I think, you know, we couldn't have got to the point that we are without that conversation being an ongoing thing. And we're always actively encouraging our HEIs to contact us if they have any questions, if they have any concerns, if they aren't quite sure what they should be doing, what the next step might look like. You know, we're always trying to reassure them that we are here for them to talk those things through with and trying to be that compassionate regulator. But, you know, it's not falling on deaf ears. It really is. It feels very much like this is an all in it together situation and mindset. So I hope that that's something that is also kind of occurring in Ireland, and from the conversations that we've had today, that certainly seems to have been the situation. But it is, you know, I can't say how helpful it's been from a regulatory perspective having that communication. It's been absolutely, you know, it's been phenomenal, really.
Yeah, absolutely, Shirley, absolutely, and I think certain. Oh, okay, I've lost Teams for some reason.
We can still hear you, Annie, that's
You
fine.
can still hear me, okay. Sorry, my screen has just gone blank, but you can still hear me. There we go. I think I'm back in again. Not sure what happened there. I'm in the wilds of Roundwood, so these things happen. Barry, I know you have your hand up. I will get you in just a second. We just have a couple of people who've come in on the chat. I won't forget you, Barry. So Roisin Smith says, after the principles are approved and adopted, how do we make them live? What steps to be taken on shared streamlined review processes and develop models for practice? Okay, and then from Brian Maguire, Shirley, do you see any international recognition issues arising from the way that different countries and the HEIs and PSRBs have responded? So maybe if we could take the first one of those first, Roisin, saying, you know, how do we make them live, these principles? How do we share them? How do we develop good practice? So I don't know who would like to maybe pick up on that one. Maybe somebody from QQI, Karina?
Yeah, maybe just to say there's a huge amount in those principles in terms of where we start with engaging. But as soon as we have everybody, well, hopefully as soon as myself and Mairead have everybody signed up between now and the end of next month, we'll be putting together a working plan, bringing the professional bodies and the HEIs more closely together to work out some of the intricacies of how we're going to share those resources and get to work together more collaboratively. So that is a big part of it. That's a really good question, Roisin, but we look forward to working with everyone on the response to that.
Okay, thank you. And just before I give Shirley a minute to think about the answer to that, Laura Flynn has put up some helpful information about an upcoming conference, Empowerment and Partnership in Student Engagement, co-hosted by QQI, NSTEP and the Student Survey, taking place on the 24th of November. So again, a useful thing to be involved in and look at there. Okay, so Shirley, there was a question from Brian Maguire, which again, the question is, do you see any international recognition issues arising from the ways that different countries have responded? A really interesting question, I think.
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, I can only really speak from a veterinary perspective, and usually there are recognition agreements in place. As you're all aware, I'm sure, we're going through a tricky little situation called Brexit right now. So
we are slightly aware of that here,
yeah.
Shirley.
Yeah. So the way that things used to work is not now the way that things work. So we have already had to put recognition agreements in place with other countries. So I think that's going to kind of help us in this situation, because I think if the regulator can be assured that whichever country we're speaking about, if the regulator is assured that that HEI is doing what they need to do and meeting all of their requirements, then there should be no reason that would impact the recognition agreement, I wouldn't have thought. Does that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, Brian is nodding. Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Barry, you've been waiting patiently. You wanted to come in. Barry, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Annie.
I said just before Barry comes in, I keep saying I'm going to get a T-shirt with "Please unmute," because it's the thing I think I say most, and I'm guilty of it myself as well. Okay, Barry, over to you.
Yeah, no, I think just to go back on the points here, I think COVID has shown us, and particularly say with Shirley's detailed examples there, and from teaching council as well, how COVID has forced us to maybe work together more to solve problems. But I would look at it from the other point of view, and going back to our own history, and indeed the work done by QQI, there are huge opportunities in this collaborative forum. And how is this going to work? It works by exactly, I think, what QQI are putting up there in terms of a platform of collaboration between the HEIs, the professional bodies, regulatory bodies, and QQI. And I guess in terms of the international side of it, to Brian's question, if you take Engineers Ireland or IKME or IMECI, you know, we're all tied in under both Bologna and the Washington Accord, and we all feed back up through ENQA as well. But so the agencies feed back up into ENQA as well. So I think again the international platform is there, but I do think that there is, because we've had examples in the past where you would have a number of bodies, shall we say, accrediting a particular program, where there has been sometimes even a bit of a Dutch auction between the two bodies. Each body is trying to raise the stakes on the other one. You know, I see your 10 CAO points and I raise your 15 type of thing. And let's throw in a foreign language as well. You know, there tends to be a bit of competition as well between the professional bodies. So I do think, you know, that the whole COVID thing should serve as as I said, not just a problem, but as an opportunity to see how we can all work together. And the structures are there between Bologna, Washington, Accord, Equar, and so on. And again, I go back to QQI. I think they have a huge role and are playing a huge role in this. So the opportunities are there, both nationally, internationally, professionally, and also on the international scheme. Thanks, Annie.
Yeah, absolutely, Barry. And I think I started at the beginning saying, you know, this is a response to a crisis, but it is, as you point out so succinctly there, a very good opportunity to look at how we develop better practice and better communication and collaboration into the future. So thank you for that. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. Does anybody have a final comment in the box that they'd like to throw in? No? Oh, Naomi Jackson. Okay, hi, Naomi. Naomi has said a statement rather than a question. Thank you, Annie, and the presenters. Thank you, Naomi. It's great to hear the flexibility has been employed and encouraging to observe a closer alignment between the providers and professional bodies than might have previously been the case. Great foundation for future innovation and closer collaboration in areas that may have previously been more segregated. Absolutely, Naomi. I think that's been a key theme of this meeting and one that was highlighted by all of the presenters. Okay, so I may just continue to just make a few more comments. Certainly the shared opportunities has been a theme, collaboration, flexibility, responsiveness, an eye on the future as well, you know, recognition that we may have to consider and think about these issues into the longer term, you know, not something we want to do, but we may have to do that. And we've seen from all the presenters, you know, the immediate reaction, but the longer term, the introduction of things into the risk register, continuing that collaboration between the bodies and maintaining those professional standards, I think is absolutely important. You know, and we've all talked about mitigating student disadvantage, how important it is that the learner is communicated with, the learner is reassured, and the integrity of the learner experience is maintained. Just remains for me to do two things. First of all, is to encourage the PSRBs and the HEIs to continue to engage with the accreditation principles, to encourage you to sign up to those principles, and as has been raised by a couple of the speakers, to involve your international partners in that as well, because we're aware that, you know, Barry talked about you know, collaboration in France, and Shirley talked about the issues internationally with Veterinary. So, and certainly it's there across a lot of the PSRBs, you have international partners. So encouraging you to involve those international partners and to sign up for the accreditation principles. As I said, there is an opportunity offered by QQI to have further dialogue around this and to have dialogue around the report that Karina referred to earlier. So Mairead will be following up with you on that. So it is just 2 o'clock. So thank you very much to all the presenters today. We had over 87 people involved in participating in this, which I think is fantastic. So just thank you again to the speakers. Thank you all for your engagement and your continued engagement with QQI. And a big thank you to QQI for facilitating this and for being the honest broker that they have been between the PSRBs and the HEIs. And I look forward to seeing the outcome of this. And a lot of people are coming up on chat saying thank you, everybody, very informative and very valuable, and people highlighting the importance of that partnership. So I don't know whether anyone from QQI would like the final word.
Maybe just to say, Annie, that we look forward to contacting the professional bodies. We know the higher education institutions are lined up to sign up to the accreditation principles, and also just to remind people to bring along their international partners as well. As Annie and Mairead have said, if you've international partners that are crucial to your professional recognition, please bring them with you and get them to sign up as well, because I suppose we won't be in a position to chase after them. So we really look forward to communicating with you very soon. Watch this.
Thank you all, and I'll sign off now. I'm going to go and see what the postman brought for me. Hopefully a parcel. Listen, have a good weekend, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.